مشاهدو العربية أيها الحضور الكريم.
Dear audience, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, at this session that is held by Al-Arabiya at the occasion of the World Economic Forum on the Middle East and North Africa related to the fourth industrial revolution in the Arab world, its challenges as well as its opportunities. We do not want to be pessimistic based on the screen video. However, undoubtedly the new technologies such as robotics as well as AI and the Internet of Things are definitely introducing major changes in how we can develop the economic value and how it's actually showcased and distributed in this society. However, this is actually threatening the jobs, opportunities, and the safety of individuals. So what are the best policies that need to be implemented by governments in adopting this technology and this technicalities, and how would they actually protect the welfare and the benefits of their people? So we will have as well Wafa bin Hassin, Council of the Middle East and North Africa Access Now. You are actually the chair of the company in the MENA region, in addition to Omar bin Sultan Al Ulama, His Excellency the Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence in the UAE, a first in the world. We have as well Murad Sonmez, the Managing Director of the head of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution at the Global Economic Forum, and we have as well Mudassir Sheikha, who is actually a success story, and Mr. Khalid al-Rumaihi, Chief Executive at the Bahrain Economic Development Board. I will be gender biased, and I'm starting with Wafa. Definitely, the fourth industrial revolution is focused mainly on the big data. Governments are compiling information about the people, and they are providing, by means of this information, social solutions and most probably security solutions. However, at the same time, they could be breaching the confidentiality or the privacy of the information available to the people.
Thank you so much for having me on this panel, and I think that's a very relevant question.
Thank you very much for having me on this
panel. I think the Arab world has
a
very big opportunity to leverage technologies in a way that benefits from its strengths. And our population today is predominantly under the age of 24. That population is tech savvy. They're often very well connected, lots of startups, and they bring us the hope to build new technologies that do respect privacy and that respect human rights. And what does that mean? It means that policies that are implemented by governments, both in terms of supporting, for example, economic ecosystems, but also in terms of providing government services through using machine learning, for example, or using e-government services generally with open data, that all of these policies start with a user-centered framework. It means that the user is at the heart of all of these frameworks. It means that the user has the right to not only own their data, because it's an extension of themselves, really, but also the capacity to amend that data, rectify that data, have interoperability to use that data where they would like, and also to be free from surveillance, from censorship, from all of these problems quite often that do face this region. And so having user-centered policies that really take the user to put them in the center and the heart of everything, that's what it means to have a more responsible type of technology. And I truly believe it's critical for us to know this as the Arab world. It's a very nuanced situation, but we are at an advantage because, again, our population is young. We're right at the helm of these new technologies, so I am very optimistic for that.
Excellency Minister, you had mentioned that the big data is a source of wealth for the governments of the future. What are the UAE doing in order to improve the life of its inhabitants, and what are the plans ahead, and how does it actually protect the privacy and the confidentiality of the people? Thank you, Lara. I shall speak in English in order to actually fit in the flow of the discussion of the speakers in this session.
Data in general, the biggest challenge that we see as governments and as individuals is we assume that if we collect data, it's going to make us richer, it's going to make us be better, and that we'll be able to create a better future. But that is a misleading statement, I think. If we do not understand the quality of the data, if we don't understand how to use them, and if we don't categorize this data in a way that allows us to be able to compute it in the right manner and to develop the right policies in place. So I think, and I mentioned this in a session yesterday, I think what's important is the quality of data. So if you have quality big data, you have, I'd say, the wealth that you would assume. If you have big data in general, it could be garbage at the end of the day. So it's very important for us to differentiate that. What the UAE is doing is we understand that in the race when it comes to artificial intelligence, we need to be proactive. Like Elon Musk said in that video, it's very important for us not to react to what's happening, because historically in the development of technology, we've always developed technologies, things have gone wrong, and then we've put policies as governments. With the fourth industrial revolution, because of the size of impact that it's going to have on many different fronts of our lives, we need to start putting policies. We need to start being agile with this technology from today. So what we've done so far, we've launched a reg lab in the UAE to test regulations and policies on 6-month bases across the whole country, which allows us to test the technology, test the policy, see the impact, and then determine if we want to really change the legislation process in the UAE to be more welcoming or to be more, let's say, restrictive for that technology. We're also developing a lot of incentives for AI companies, developing a lot of incentives for data centers to move to the UAE. And we understand 100% that the new industrial revolution is focused on two things. It's on quality data and on compute. If we have the ecosystem that gives these two things to any company that wants to work in that space, we are going to become the leaders. And finally, I believe that not one country is going to lead in the fourth industrial revolution. The difference between all industrial revolutions and the fourth industrial revolution is it's so wide. There are so many technologies. There are so many moving parts that there are going to be hubs of excellence across the world. And each hub is going to champion one domain or two domains. And we want to champion the domain of government first and foremost, and then be the platform. We want to become government as a platform for any fourth industrial revolution effort in the UAE.
سوف نعود إلى طريقة التعامل مع
We shall resume regarding how to deal with the data that's compiled by the private sector. Murad, I would like to hear from you. If we take the example of a biometric ID, for example, I believe that in India, for example, we have there has been a compilation of the information related to 1 billion persons. We're talking about prints, our fingerprints. We're talking about banking data. Is it actually safe to have all this information, to compile all this information, especially for a region that is usually subjected and at the receiving end of electronic attacks?
I think it's not just limited to biometric, but you can add genetics to the mix. I think there are ways to protect the privacy of individuals while making sure that we take advantage of the enormous potential we have with machine learning algorithms. And I agree with Wafa that we need to take a human-centered approach and look at the positive impact and negative and maximize the positive and ideally eliminate, if not minimize the negatives. And in terms of data policy, our approach, the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution Network, is to separate or decouple, as we say in technical terms, who owns the data, what you can do with it, and who gets rewarded. And there are mechanisms to keep the data where it's collected so you don't have to put everything in one place. That makes it harder to hack. But assign also the rights for the data by the individuals, by the owners. And what makes it more interesting is we have 8 billion people, close to 8 billion people on the planet, but we have 20 billion things providing data. And in the future, we'll have 100 billions of these things providing data. So we need a secure framework, flexible framework that allows us to use the data from the things and the people in an effective and useful manner. And there's, again, technical ways to approach that. And in our network, we're working with several governments, including Bahrain and the UAE, to address that in an agile manner. And I agree with Omar that we don't have much time to figure out, so we need to get going and do and learn and iterate.
مدثر أود رأي القطاع الخاص.
I would love to hear from the private sector, especially that Karim has been subjected to an electronic assault and the information of around 14 million clients have been breached. What can guarantee for the clients of Karim currently that this will not happen again? And what about the internal systems? Do they actually protect the information of your clients from, for example, the employees? Because, of course, some threats have been raised in the West regarding that there is no system that could protect the information of clients when it comes to their journeys, and that this information could be misused.
So thank you for the question. Let me put this panel, at least from my perspective, in context. And the context that I see is we have a region that has, depending on how you define the region, 400 to 600 million people. We have a region that has largely missed out on a lot of the infrastructure development that happened in the developed world. So the quality of life that we have given our people is not at the same level as Europe or the US or other parts of the developed world did. We have massive unemployment, we have crumbling infrastructure, we really have a lot of catch-up to do. So in that context, the way that I view the fourth industrial revolution is an opportunity for us to leapfrog into the digital future. And this is our opportunity to actually build that infrastructure, build the systems that took some of the developed world decades and decades to build. And we can do it much faster. If you look at the example of Careem and ride-hailing in general, we have been able to build a transportation infrastructure that would have traditionally cost billions and billions of dollars at a fraction of the cost, and it's actually being done in a crowd-funded way by individuals buying cars and vehicles and putting onto our platform. And that's actually been done not by reducing jobs, but by actually creating a lot of jobs. So technology a lot of times gets known for killing jobs, and automation seems like a bad word. But in this case, and there are examples outside of Careem as well, where platforms like Careem have actually created a lot of jobs and created infrastructure that wasn't there before. So I view the fourth industrial revolution as our opportunity to catch up, as our opportunity to leapfrog, and actually get to parity with the rest of the world. Now, in that context, now, of course, technology doesn't come without challenges. Some of the challenges that you mentioned around privacy, around cybersecurity, are real challenges that we have to contend with. And we, as the developers and custodians of these platforms, have a responsibility to make sure that these things are top of mind for us. But I just want to make sure that in the amount of effort and work that needs to be done to pull our people out of poverty and give them a certain quality of life, these challenges don't become stumbling blocks. They become as challenges that we work together to resolve, that we put the right regulations in place, but we really work together to overcome these challenges and really focus on leapfrogging our region into the digital future.
Thank you so much, Khalid.
Khalid, Bahrain is trying to becoming a hub for the data centers, and a law has been enacted recently regarding the confidentiality of the data. Could you please talk to us about it? Is it actually similar to the GDPR, the European GDPR? Thank you. In the name of God, most gracious, most merciful. In order to fit in with the other speakers, I can speak in English. No, I had already agreed that with the minister we will be sharing the same language, though the anchor person has asked him to speak in Arabic because it's broadcasted live on Arabiya.
And the data protection law was not modeled on the GDPR. It was modeled on the EU directive that was issued in 2005. And so we think that as we look to enter into the knowledge economy, we have to understand how we protect customer data. We think the GDPR is a great law, but we wanted to stick with the 2005 directive. And frankly, we're now compelling institutions to comply with that law. The banks, anybody that is collecting customer data has to comply with that law. So we built it on the 2005 directive. But I want to address, as we look at the fourth industrial revolution, if we're going to be serious about, as a region, tapping into this opportunity, then data has to be protecting data, allowing data to be analyzed, distributing that data is going to be at the key of our strategy. I'm going to steal a quote that Murat mentioned that I heard him say yesterday, which I loved. If data is the new oil, then China is the new Saudi Arabia. Because they have that scale as a country to be able to mine that data in a way that no other region in the world probably can. So if the Middle East is going to have some critical mass, then we have to do several things. One is we have to have the refinery in our region. And we went out to the world and said, why is Google, Amazon, Microsoft not setting up sales offices, but actually having that data center, that hyperscale data center in our region? And with Amazon, we were successful. They're going to build a hyperscale data center, 3 data centers in Bahrain. It's going to be launched this summer. So we think that is a building block, not for Bahrain, but for the entire Middle East. The second element is, how do we ensure that we're not hyper-protective over our data in countries and not allowing that scale that China has? We can't reach that scale, but how do we allow pooling of data? Because you're going to need genetic, traffic, health information of the Middle East at scale to allow it to be relevant statistically. And so we introduced a data jurisdiction law, the first in the world, which says to corporates and to governments, if you store your data in Bahrain, it can be governed by the laws of your country. And we think that is going to be a groundbreaking law. One of the Arab countries, I'm not sure I can mention their name, has already signed up to store their data in Bahrain. And we hope, again, this will proliferate otherwise. So if we don't have the refinery, if we don't have that pooling of data, then how are we going to have a statistically relevant information in the Middle East? So we take this situation, or we take this opportunity very seriously, while not neglecting protecting customer data.
نحن على كل حال سألنا على تويتر عملنا استبيان.
We have conducted a survey on Twitter, and we asked the people, do you trust that the governments or that the private companies are capable of protecting the information that they are compiling? Let's look at the results. Let's look at the results of the survey. So the highest percentage was clearly no, 64%. They do not trust that the companies or that the governments are capable of protecting their data from abuse or from piracy. And I believe that this is due to many of the scandals that you have witnessed recently, including, of course, the Cambridge Analytica. And here is a question: to what extent would laws similar to the GDPR are enough and sufficient to protect the information of the user, of the private sector user? And shall we take additional measures, such as, for example, the claims that we have received from an American senator asking for the incrimination of the CEOs of private sector companies, the ones who are actually breaching the confidentiality of the information of their clients?
We do a really good start in protecting user data and customer data, but I do think that countries are trying to figure out in different ways. And so while the European Union has the GDPR now, it does have an extraterritoriality element to it, where other countries may have to also comply with that regulation just because the data that they're treating belongs to residents of the EU. And so it's certainly a great start, and the way I see it is that it's a race to the top. If other countries can have similar laws to the GDPR, that would be great. Obviously, I don't think I would call for jailing top executives. I think that's really missing the point. I think there's a wide range of policies that could be implemented, not just by the social media platforms themselves, but also by the governments, and such as the United States, that host these companies. And so, and you mentioned earlier something about biometric ID and digital identity. That's an even added, a more, I would say, grave layer to all of this. When we talk about data that was pulled on in the survey that you just mentioned, I'm sure they mean probably your personal data on websites. But when you talk about digital identity here, we're talking about biometric information, information that a user is unable to change with your biometric ID or your iris, with your biometric thumbprint or iris. And so, and a plethora of other types of biometric information. And so this, I mean, to have a connected city, to have a hyper-connected world, to have services be delivered efficiently, and to be inclusive in public services, sure, digital identity is great, but it just makes the necessity of having appropriate cybersecurity infrastructure, data privacy regulation, all the more important. And as you mentioned, we saw it in Aadhaar in India, where I believe someone can buy the personal data of millions of Indians for $10 to $12 on WhatsApp. I mean, exactly. So we see these examples quite often, and it's imperative that we're very, very aware of that. and that we don't just move fast and break things. We have to move well and build things well. And now is obviously not the time to break things, it's time to build and to build it properly.
معالي الوزير رح اخذ رأي شوي شركات.
Excellency, I will be listening to the opinion of the internet companies. Some say that in the Arab countries there are several challenges and obstacles to the work of these companies because there are laws on electronic crimes which are actually making their life difficult and which would mean constricting the activity of some companies. And this is related, of course, to some security issues, and this is not applicable in other countries. So what do you have to say about this?
Thank you for that question. I'd just like to reiterate the point that Wafa said with regards to data first, and then answer this question. The biggest challenge that we see right now is that most money is made through data collection. So there's a lot of investment, billions of dollars going from these private sector companies into data collection systems that allow them to collect data, sensitive data of many people across the world. But there's no incentive for them to invest as much in protecting the data. So that's why we're seeing the breaches, we're seeing all of the issues that are happening, and that is multiplied across different companies and across different governments as well globally. So I think the new revolution should be a revolution of, if you're going to collect it, you need to be responsible enough to store it and to invest in storing it in the right way. With regards to the private sector, I would jump out on a limb here and say the private sector is great. I think what they're doing in this space is incredible, but we need to also try to understand what are the cultural norms in certain countries, what are the concerns that certain governments have, and not treat the whole world as a one-size-fits-all and paint it in a very wide brush. And the difference is that today the internet crosses borders. And governments try to be open. They try to work with these platforms. So we as the UAE, for example, every single time a company does something that might not fit 100% with our outlook for the future, we come and we sit with them on the table. We've done that with Uber in the past, and with Dathur was actually one of the success stories of coming and sitting with the government, understanding the challenges, and working around it with a solution that today proves to be better than the initial solution that certain companies had in mind. I believe that in the future we need to be agnostic of the concerns of government. We need to work together because governments exist to serve people. Governments exist to ensure that the future is better than what it is today. The private sector, in some circumstances, focuses on economic return. How much money can we make out of this platform or out of the solution? If it conflicts with my view on the future of my society, it's a challenge that we need to address, and the only way to do it is to work together. The final thing I'd like to say is the motive for the private sector and the motive for government should be aligned. We need to develop all technologies responsibly. So the call that we make out of the UAE is we need to be responsible in developing technology, even in AI. The motto that His Highness Sheikh Mohammed gave to me when he appointed me as Minister of State for Artificial Intelligence is, you need to build a responsible artificial intelligence nation. So my guiding star is this, responsible development. And we're trying to do this on all technological developments, on all technological deployments. And that's the call that I would actually say for all private sector companies.
Murad, please, can you please brief me on this? How could you actually compare between the laws for cyber crimes in the Arab countries in comparison with the rest of the world?
I think it's important for us to be not punitive in terms of regulatory frameworks, but enabling. I'll give you one example. One of the Middle East countries' chief scientist told me that his daughter is a cancer researcher in Massachusetts. She developed a blood test to detect pancreatic cancer long before the symptoms kick in, and it's, as you may know, it's one of the deadliest forms of cancer. She needed data from nearby hospitals across the street. She could see the data, she could touch the data, but she could not use the data because of existing privacy laws. So while it's important to protect the privacy of the individuals, we need to make sure that we don't get in the way of the potential. And if you look at Japan, it's a declining population, peaked at 125 million, 4 million people with dementia. It will double in the next 10 to 20 years. Most countries will face the same situation, and it will cripple the Japanese economy. So we need to combine data on environment, lifestyle, genetics, hospitalization, clinical trials, and vitals in order for us to accelerate the cure and provide a proper living condition. And also for countries where we don't have the skills, AI and machine learning algorithms can fill the skill gap while we're training our people. In developed countries where we have a productivity issue, they can help improve the productivity. So I think we need to be potential-oriented as opposed to while considering the threats. And I agree with Omar that we cannot expect consensus. I mean, those days are unfortunately over. But we can look for interoperability. And we can take a regional approach. And that's what we're seeing in the Middle East, in ASEAN, in Japan, and India, as we work with several governments and private sector companies and entrepreneurs and civil society leaders. Everybody agrees that we need to be forward-looking, opportunity for the citizens-oriented, mindful of the threats. And there are technologies that reduces the risk. For example, edge computing and blockchain. I'm not talking about cryptocurrency, but the architecture. And there's huge potential with these technologies. And as we iterate through different governments, partnerships, I think we'll find the right balance.
تحدثنا عن الخصوصية. دعونا ننتقل إلى التحدي الآخر.
Let's now move to another challenge, which is very important when it comes to the fourth industrial revolution, which is related to the security threats. Looking at the sector of transportation, there have been many developments. We have drones that can be used for logistics and that can be used as well in wars. We currently have many drones that are being used. We have as well the unmanned cars. We have as well deadly robots. And the UN is currently looking at this issue, and it's standing against all this, which is actually opposed by some of the great powers, such as, for example, the US. Do you believe that these have to be prohibited to start with?
So, you know, at most startups, including Kareem, we believe in this methodology called Agile. And the core belief in Agile is that you don't know what the future holds. You don't know what customers will like and customers will not like. So the best way to sort of build a product in this environment is to build what they call a minimal viable product, launch it, and learn and iterate, learn and iterate, learn and iterate. And I would say that with a lot of these technologies, it's going to be very, very similar. You know, technology can be a force for good, but technology can also be used in a destructive way. And the applications of these technologies could be very different in our region compared to other parts of the world because some of the infrastructure challenges are different. So my view on this would be, let's not prohibit any technology from coming in, and let's have people start solving some of our problems, genuine problems with this technology, but take a very close monitoring approach to the applications. And as and when we see technology starting to be used for things that are destructive, that's when we intervene. If we start blocking technology at the outset, we actually might miss out on the many positive aspects of technology.
But can we control killer robots? Have you watched Terminator?
You know, there's always a risk, right? And I think for the sake of our people, for the sake of development, we'll have to take some risk, right? Because if we don't take any risk, then we risk leaving large percentages of our population in poverty. And maybe just want to make one point on the point of responsibility. I really like what Omar said. I think as people that develop technology, we all need to own up to making sure that technology is being used in a responsible way. It's not enough to say that, look, we have built this ride-hailing platform, you know, we'll match a customer with a captain, and then whatever happens in the car is not our problem. We are simply a matchmaking platform. And I think more and more, and we're seeing this with companies like Facebook and others, where as people that develop technology, we need to make sure that the technology is being used in a responsible way. We need to ensure the safety of the people taking rides with us, in the same way that Facebook probably needs to ensure that fake news are not becoming a big part of the platform and creating side effects. So all of us need to become more responsible. We need guidance, we need support, we need an enabling environment to be responsible. But let's not stop technology from solving our problems because it introduces some risk.
سيد خالد ما رأيك خاصة إنه
Mr. Khalid, what do you think about this, especially that with the developments that we are witnessing in terms of technology, the private sector is now selling technology to other countries and to other companies in the private sector, or maybe in small countries they are maybe selling them technology that is related to spying or to surveillance, which used to be actually solely restricted into the intelligence services of some countries. Could this be organized? Could this actually be contained to ensure that they do not go astray?
I'm going to, I guess, reiterate what I heard many of the panelists, and maybe just latching on to what Mudathar mentioned. We have to balance the risk of technology with the opportunity. And we, this is moving so fast, technology is moving so fast. You look at, I travel a lot to China, you look at facial recognition. And of course, that has some security usages, but it could also allow you to cross into an airport and check in much easier. It could allow customer interaction to be much smoother. So what we in the Kingdom of Bahrain do is that we're working with the World Economic Forum and the Fourth Industrial Center in California. We have a fellow there, a lady, a woman, who is spending the next year understanding what are the implications of regulation, but how do we also stay ahead of this in terms of understanding the opportunity? So we have to ensure that we're managing risk with opportunity. I'll give you another example. We've introduced in financial technology a sandbox, much like Omar mentioned in the Reg Lab, but we've done it in financial technology. We understand, for instance, that cryptocurrency exchanges, there's a risk, but there's an opportunity. And in that sandbox, we allow companies to test their product for 9 months. Central Bank of Bahrain has been very forward-thinking. And then after those 9 months are complete, they allow them to potentially graduate to the formal rule book. We cannot close ourselves off to the world. I think it would be detrimental to the Middle East if we ignore what technology has to offer. Not just for the technology in its sake, but for the jobs. Ultimately, all of us in the Middle East need to create jobs. And these jobs are going to come in the future as engineers, coders, data scientists. So unless we adopt these technologies, make sure that we have, like Kareem, homegrown startups that emerge from this, that's how we're going to ultimately make sure that technology is not just technology for its own sake, but also for job creation. So we, of course, have to manage risk, but we have to not ignore opportunity.
So let us discuss now ethical issues with Wafa. You know that we have a lot of challenges, like, for example, genetic engineering, the CRISPR technique used, and we know that the same technique could cure diseases and at the same time could create this superhuman being. So how will we deal with this new technology?
Engineering, I would like to go back very briefly to a few of the points that my co-panelists have made. At the very heart and foundation of the internet is that it is open, interoperable, and it's a space for freedom. And if we start to reduce and close the civil society space or civic space generally online, then that's actually how we close ourselves off to the rest of the world. I would have to disagree with my fellow panelists from Kareem, unfortunately, but I do think that there are some technologies that we cannot welcome. And that is based, I mean, there are several of them. It's not even just technologies, it's maybe mechanisms of doing certain technologies. But luckily, we have international human rights standards. And that's something that I think has been more or less lacking from this conversation, because ethics is one thing, but human rights are another, and states are obliged to comply with these human rights standards. And we also have the UN guiding principles on business and human rights that are not binding, but they also provide a lot of guidance for how business should provide services in a way that protects users. I also think that in terms of airport check-ins, usually it saves you about 15 extra seconds. But are you willing to give up every single point on your face for facial recognition to have it stored somewhere and save 15 seconds of your life? I mean, that's, I think it's a judgment call for users to make, but it's really, this is what I mean when I say responsible technology. I mean that the technology is being deployed in a way that makes sense for the user and that does not put the user at risk of having their data be abused. I know we all have the best of intentions, but it's not up to us if our data is hacked or not. And to answer your question about genetic engineering, I think genetic engineering and CRISPR should be banned. I mean, you asked me as a person, but I think we still need, I mean, I'll answer you as a policy person. I think we still need to develop regulation around that, and we still need to develop guidelines for how we can engage in these kinds of practices.
We asked also on Twitter about this issue. سألنا إذن على تويتر سؤال حول.
We have raised a question on Twitter about genetic engineering. Do you support it regardless of religious and ethical issues? And we noticed that we have a great discrepancy. 39% said yes, but 43% said no. The UAE had a genome project. What are the rules and regulations that could put a framework for genetic engineering?
But
you can answer that too.
I'll answer that briefly and then go to the genomics part. I think just commenting on what Mudathar said and commenting on the stigma that's associated with killer robots, 9 out of 10 articles that I read are on how killer robots are coming and they're nearing and the Terminator scenarios happening. And I tend to see these articles and feel like we're living in a world where news is on, it goes viral depending on how scared it makes a person feel, rather than how accurate it is. The news that we're seeing is very subjective. And it's about how many clicks we can generate. Today, with regards to killer robots, I believe that the dangers in the short term from biotech far outweigh any dangers from killer robots. Because for less than $100, the person can buy a kit and alter smallpox or alter one of the diseases in their backyard and create a disease that cannot be traced back to him or her, that can spread globally, cross borders, and kill hundreds of millions of people. This exists today. I'm not talking about 20 years down the line. The risk of that and the barrier to entry for that is much higher than a killer robot that's going to cost $200 million to develop and can only operate for half an hour because the batteries are not really that efficient, and can only operate in one specific geography at a certain point of time. So I think that we need to think about these technologies in a very realistic manner and not focus on one specific technology or one specific impact. With regards to genomics and genetics engineering and all of that, in the UAE, we believe that there's a lot of promise that comes with sequencing genomes. The promise is that we'll be able to solve certain health issues, cure certain diseases, and the only way we can do that is through exploring genomics. So we need to do that in general. If we don't do it, someone else will. But what we can promise, or what we can do, is we can try to anonymize the data as much as possible to ensure that we are focusing on the science rather than on the person. And that's our effort, and that's what we're focusing on. We haven't perfected it yet, but what we are doing as an approach is we're trying to welcome every single person that's working in this domain to come and share with us how they would do it best. And then through the Reg Lab, through our accelerator programs, actually do a POC to try to understand how do we ensure that privacy is not affected, but the promise of this technology is realized.
Murad, when it comes to ethical issues, some countries, like European countries, have published an ethical code for private companies like Google and Facebook. So they are trying to establish these entities in order to develop algorithms that will let us know in the future who will be taking a loan, who will be registering in university. Yet the problem is that these centers are not representative of all communities, especially women. So are we creating additional discrepancy and the lack of justice?
This issue is not new. If you look at, before I answer that question, I want to disagree with Wafa, who disagreed with Mudassir. In terms of facial recognition, I just looked up the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR. There are 20 people are newly displaced every minute of the day. And there are 65.6 million people displaced, refugees. They don't have any papers, they don't have ID. And if you're not recognized, you don't get anything. And facial recognition will allow us, technologies like that, to give them the rights as a human being. So it's not just 15 seconds at the airport. It's if you're one of those displaced people, it means life and death. So it has a lot of potential. Yes, 15 seconds at the airport is an additional benefit. So I disagree with you that it's not just for the privileged few. If you look at the ethics issue, Lara, thanks to electricity, we're having this discussion. Thanks to electricity, we have connectivity, et cetera. But when electricity was adopted in the US in late 19th, early 20th century, factories caught on fire. And then they couldn't use it. And insurance companies got fed up, and they launched the underwriter laboratories that took the technology called circuit breaker and came up with a standard protocol and turned to the factories and said, if you do not implement the underwriter laboratories UL certified circuit breakers, we're not going to insure you. Thanks to that, we're all here and benefiting from electricity. There are different similar approaches we can take about algorithms. You cannot legislate ethics. It's value system. And if you look at the AI machine learning developments, it's called black box algorithms. The algorithms are derived from the data. So how do we make sure that the algorithms are ethical when a person is not writing the code? Number one is make sure that the data is representative. It's not biased. We talked about oil. But Omar taught us the difference between Venezuelan oil and the Middle East oil, the sweet. Is that what you said? So,
yeah, quality data.
Quality data. Sweet crude is what we want in the data. The second area is looking at the transparency of the algorithms. And I talked to OpenAI guys, and they said we'll solve that in the next 2 to 3 years. Until then, we can come up, and that's the area we're working on, is to develop an ethics switch similar to circuit breaker that can be embedded in these devices that reflects the value system of the countries, because we cannot impose each other values. And when and if we, and hopefully, inshallah, will have that common AI ethical principles, then we can push it down.
مدثر قبل أن أنتقل إليك.
Mudassir, before going back to you, you were with us at the beginning of this week in Arabiya, and we held an interview about the Uber agreement. So we congratulate you, and we will be viewing this video now.
هذا إذن استبيان ثالث أجريناه.
Yet this is a third survey that we have implemented. What is the thing that scares you the most when it comes to artificial intelligence? And the majority of the respondents spoke about losing job opportunities, 45%. I hope that we will be able to show a video about our interview with Mudassir in Arabiya.
Of delivering impact. And as we looked at ourselves almost a year ago and said, this is how far we have come. We've created 1 million jobs in the region. What's the next phase for Kareem? We realized that we're just getting started.
إذن خلقنا
So you have created 1 million jobs in the region during this very brief period of time. This is a great accomplishment, yet we know that within a few years we will have autonomous cars. So what will happen for those?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one that that we think quite a bit about, because the purpose of Kareem and the reason we started Kareem was to simplify the lives of people in the region and build an awesome organization that inspires. So simplifying the lives of people is core to our purpose. And we call the people that drive for us captains as a sign of respect. These are the people that have helped us build Kareem and that have helped build this infrastructure that has simplified the lives of so many people. So their welfare, their prosperity, and their families are super, super important to us. And 2 perspectives on this topic of autonomous. Number one, it is going to happen at some point, whether it takes 10 years, it takes 15 years, it takes 20 years. It might take a little bit longer in our region because of the cost arbitrage. It's a little bit, labor is a little bit cheaper. It might take a little bit longer in some parts of our region due to the way traffic works, but it is going to happen at some point.
Few years longer?
Few years, it's anyone's guess at this point, right? But just to give you one data point on that, in the US, the cost of a driver as a percent of the cost of a trip is 80%. That percent in this region is 25%. So the technology, autonomous technology, will have to become a lot more affordable before it can economically start replacing humans. And if you've been to Cairo or Karachi or Lahore, you can also see the traffic in 3 lanes. We have six cars driving. So the technology has a slightly higher burden on accuracy for it to make sense in our markets. So it will take some more time, but it is going to happen. And I think the only answer to this is we really need to spend and invest in the education of our people. We need to make sure that we are upskilling our populations at large and equipping them for this fourth industrial revolution. The people will not just be displaced through autonomous driving, but there'll be many other things that will displace people. And it is our responsibility to make sure that that upskilling happens much, much faster and happens at scale. And I actually believe that we can use technology as a way to assist this upskilling as well. You know, a lot of the developed world built a fairly sophisticated education infrastructure. There are schools, there are colleges, there are universities that cater to almost all of their populations. But if you look at our region, we didn't build enough schools, we didn't build enough colleges, and even if we build them, we didn't build them of the highest quality. Now, with technology, with the internet, we should be able to figure out how to impart quality education much faster, much more affordably through online education. If we have one qualified professor, that qualified professor can serve a lot more people today with technology that's available than was the case in the past. So the only answer to this autonomous and displacing people is to put this at the top of our priority list and make sure that we're starting to drive this agenda from the very highest levels.
Thank you, Mudassir. We have a few minutes left. Let's take some questions from the audience, please. I would kindly ask you to give short answers.
Hazem Galal from PwC. We've got two great examples of governments that are enabling regulators here in the region, but I wanted to hear from the panel, what are their thoughts on some of the other countries in the region that are still in the third industrial revolution, thinking about automation, and how can we make sure we're not a two-speed region?
بتوجه السؤال لشخص معين?
Anybody who would like to take it.
Who would like to answer that?
Let me take one perspective on this one. You know, what at least we have seen happen to some extent is the lack of the presence of traditional infrastructure actually blocks new technologies from coming in. If you look at Europe and ride-hailing, Europe built sophisticated transport infrastructure, and that actually became a barrier to the adoption of ride-hailing. So I would even argue, and some people find that controversial, is that the transportation infrastructure today in Cairo, with the likes of Careem and Uber being available anywhere in Cairo for 3 minutes, is probably superior to one in Paris and London. So technology can actually move a lot faster if there is a void that it can fill versus there is existing infrastructure that can block. So we may realize and we may find out, and pleasantly surprised, that some of the have-nots in our region actually might benefit from technology even greater because there is a void to fill versus existing infrastructure and incumbents that come in the way.
Khalid.
If I can address that as well, I think, you know, I think larger countries, Egypt, ones with larger populations, I can understand the challenges of introducing technology or moving as fast as smaller countries. So I believe that the responsibility of smaller countries is to pilot and be agile and illustrate the benefits. And we see that. We see many countries come visit Bahrain to understand how we introduced certain technologies, how we developed regulation. I think governments are trying to move very quickly. I'm very optimistic when I see visits from other larger countries in terms of how they're trying to adapt to technology. So while obviously it's more of a challenge to implement the same regulation in Egypt as it would be to Bahrain, we're willing to share. We believe in collaboration, and we welcome governments to come visit us and understand how we've implemented regulation. And then they can obviously take comfort that we've done it and they can mimic.
شكرا سيد خالد. بس سؤال أخير للسيدة.
Thank you, Sayyid Khalid. We take a second question. Go ahead, ma'am, please.
أرجو التعريف عن نفسك.
Please present yourself.
One New York-based tech investor. Perhaps to the policymakers, I was wondering if you could speak to the value of education and encouraging uptake in education in artificial intelligence, and especially encouraging girls, because we recently had a recruitment process in the region for a scholarship for AI in partnership with the Montreal Institute for Artificial Intelligence, and we received 100 applicants, and 3 of them were girls. And what we found was that technology is a great equalizer, right? Like you can, technology doesn't care if you're black or white or a hijab or not, right? You can do that from anywhere. You can work from home. So I think that it has a great potential moving forward. So I was wondering if you'd like to address that. Thank you.
معالي الوزير، بعرف في coding classes بلشتوها بالإمارات.
Your Excellency,
Coding
can
classes,
you tell us
one,
about
yes,
the coding classes
a different
in the
angle in the
Emirates?
UAE. I think we should encourage boys to go to these classes because we actually ran a small test, I would say, proof of concept. We did something called the AI summer camp last summer to see how many kids from the schools across the country can we get interested in artificial intelligence, introduce artificial intelligence to, and then give them basic coding principles when it comes to AI. I honestly was expecting to have 100 students attend these classes, and most of them to be boys. We had over 5,000, and around 70% were girls. So it was incredible. It represents the hunger that we have in the Middle East, and I think it represents the broader region, hopefully. What we're doing in the UAE is we want to get everyone to be a part of this future, and we want them to understand the impact of AI in the right manner. So we're doing multiple programs. One is this AI camp. We expanded it to be year-long, and we have different camps. We have a camp actually ongoing right now on data science at this given moment across the country. And we're aiming, hopefully by the end of the year, to have more than 15,000 students that go through this program. We're also deploying AI within our educational curriculum, focused first and foremost in the primary phase on ethics, because we want to ensure that students have a very strong ethical compass when it comes to developing these technologies, to engaging with these technologies, and to working with these technologies in the future. And then moving from grade 5 onwards to understanding how to shape this technology and how this technology is going to shape their jobs, how this technology is going to shape their future, and how they can be a part of this future. So I hope this answers your question.
انتهى وقتنا للأسف. أكيد ممكن استكمال هذه النقاشات خارج القاعة. أود أن أشكركم على هذا الحوار الشيق وأيضا على أسئلتكم وعلى وجودكم معنا. شكرا جزيلا. إذن هذه نهاية الجلسة الحوارية حول الثورة الصناعية الرابعة من المنتدى الاقتصادي العالمي في البحر الميت. شكرا للمتابعة وإلى اللقاء.